So my very first question for you then is, tell us about food in Mumbai. Where do we have, when we visit, where do we have to go? Welcome, foodie fans. It's another Travel Tuesday. This Travel Tuesday, we have Hari in the house. He actually is a local celebrity who has all kinds of accolades from celebrities. So we are going to bring him right in and ask him to tell us a little bit more about how he got to the position he's currently in. Hari, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bryce. Good evening to you. Good evening to Carla. I know she's behind the scenes there.
So what's in your glass this evening?
Yeah, so today I have a very special beverage. It's a Barrel Select 2012 Barrel Select Andrew wine. Andrew Lane wine, I should say. So Andrew Dixon is a wonderful winemaker who comes from a great family of winemakers from Napa Valley. And a few years ago, Jennifer and I were in Napa, and Jennifer found him and his winery, and we went up the mountain and spent an amazing amount of time with him. And he had us taste very graciously a whole number of wines. And I zoomed in on one wine. I've been drinking his wines ever since. I was happy to see that he's still got some wines left. So this really came in about 3 days ago from Napa, and I've got 6 bottles in I had 6 bottles when they came in. I'm on my second bottle right now. So it's a 2012 Red Blend Napa Barrel Select by Andrew Lane Winery.
Is that coming through your restaurant, or are you ordering that through someone
This is
else?
a personal purveyor. I mean, personal purchase, if you will. So no, I mean, obviously we could get it through the restaurant, but it's a different beast with that. It's almost like I don't want too many people to know about this. I mean, Andrew Lane makes great wine, and but he doesn't make a huge amount of wine. I'm sure he would like the business, but I think he does fairly well for himself.
Of course, yes.
What are you drinking?
We're drinking Zinfandel only because it went with our dinner. It's not anything fantastic. It's an off-the-shelf kind of bottle.
You know what I say? If it tastes good, it's fantastic. That's all you need. That's the only prerequisite for wine to be fantastic. It must taste good.
That's right. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Well, there's the figurative here, and there's the physical here, and I'll make this very short because I could go on for a while, like most of us can. But I'm in my 21st year in this little town of DeLand. I teach full-time at Stetson University. I teach mathematics. I'm an associate professor of mathematics. I was born and raised in Mumbai. And at the age of 21, I came to this country on a Pan Am flight, actually a jumbo jet. Some of you may remember that airline. And I went through Virginia Tech, I went through George Mason University, the University of Florida, all for graduate education in mathematics. And then after graduate school, I had academic positions at Valdosta State, Bethune-Cookman College, or University, I should say, at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and then now at Stetson University. And then about 15 years ago, I got a hair up my ass, and I decided to go to culinary school because I was professionally kind of bored. And so I took on this additional challenge of training myself as a chef. And I initially just went to school to get an education and try to, become proficient in another field altogether. And what began as a curiosity and a professional interest ended up being a full-time vocation as well. So in our 12th year now, we have the restaurant. I've stepped away from day-to-day operations of the restaurant, but for 11 years straight, my wife and I ran that place full tilt, in addition to holding on to our day job. So that's my long story short, if that makes sense. Hope that was good enough.
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit. I'm dying to know. You and I have talked before, but I really don't know the backstory about how you got to a point where so many celebrities in the food genre have taken a liking to you and forwards and things of that nature.
Well, so, all of these individuals, they're very gracious. I know them all in one way or another. Either I've met them at professional events, some of them I've cooked with, some I've just been in touch with, some I've been at events with together. So I didn't reach out to celebrities for the sake of celebrities. I reached out to individuals who I actually knew and know to some degree, and consider many of them friends. So I guess that's really the first thing you should know is it's not just, I didn't shoot out a whole bunch of emails to well-known people saying, hey, would you write something nice? So, I've been very fortunate in this industry that I took on the job of being a chef and a restaurateur, all hands, if you will. And I know you know Ricky Lee. That's how we met together.
Absolutely.
But Ricky will tell you about my backstory. But I've been to the James Beard House many times. I'm fairly well, I wouldn't say connected, but I'm well involved with the James Beard Foundation. So some of these connections have come through that association. Some have come through just my curiosity as an academic and as a chef who just does more than cooking. So I've always been intrigued by what people who I respect do and how they do what they do. And so, I've just been very fortunate that every one of them came through for me, and they took the time to read a draft of the book that I sent them during the summertime. And they all, as you point out, have really nice things to say, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. Yesterday was Being Grateful Day or something like that.
Oh yeah.
In 1965 they started this to be grateful for something, and so the timing of your question couldn't be more apt because I'm very grateful for the support.
I can understand why. For me, and I know a lot of Floridians, especially Central Florida, Chef Art Smith is very well known. So to have him writing for you, that's phenomenal.
Well, thank you. And if I had some notice and we could do this maybe another day, maybe he would join us one day on one of these joint calls and we could all talk together.
That would be fantastic. We would be honored.
As would I. He's a wonderful man. He's a wonderful, genuine man.
So let me ask you this. I know you said that you were born and raised in Mumbai. When did you actually leave? At what age did you leave Mumbai?
I was 21. So at the age of 21 in the year 1987. I'm a little bit older than you possibly. I don't know. I don't want to guess your age, but I'm 54 now. And, so in 1987, at the age of 21, I left the shores of Mumbai and Bombay back then, and flew to New York, and from New York to Roanoke, Virginia, to Blacksburg, Virginia, and that began my journey as a graduate student in this country. So
what year were you in Virginia? What year did you start in Virginia?
Well, I started in 87, the year I came here.
Okay.
I didn't spend any time in New York. It was just more of a transit. So I started my graduate school and my time in this country in 1987 in Virginia, in Blacksburg, Virginia. And then from there, after a year, I went to Fairfax, Virginia to attend George Mason University. And then year after that, I came to Gainesville, Florida to attend the University of Florida. And so ever since then, I've been in the southeast of the United States, in Georgia mostly.
I only asked because I joined the Navy and was stationed in Virginia, but I didn't arrive there until 94.
Gotcha. Were you in Norfolk? Were you in Norfolk, Virginia?
I was, yeah. Yep. But I went up to Roanoke plenty of times just because of business.
Mm-hmm.
But so since you were in Mumbai all the way until the age of 21, I'm sure you've probably gone back and visited as well, right?
We have. My wife and I try to visit almost every year.
Okay.
Even before I got married to Jennifer, I was still trying to visit India and Mumbai specifically almost every year. It's very expensive, but as an academic, we do get some time off during the summer and during the Christmas holidays. So I would often plan way ahead and find a way to try to go back every year. Some years I missed, but in the 33 years I've been in this country, I would say I've been back to India probably 15 times. Okay.
So my very first question for you then is, tell us about food in Mumbai. Where do we have, when we visit, where do we have to go? Your hometown eats.
Indeed. So I'll answer your question in a moment. I'll turn the question around and ask and sort of phrase it in the way that you would have a hard time answering yourself, I think. If I was to ask you, where do you eat in New York City? Or if I would ask you, where do you eat in Paris? we all have our favorites, but it's such this mecca of food, or San Francisco for that matter, that it's hard to pick a place. But certainly, funny you asked me that, because I'm still writing parts of the book, the upcoming book. And just today I was writing some reflections about some street food that I have recipes for in the book. And that street food, of course, is street food from Mumbai. And so growing up, I didn't go to restaurants. We were not a wealthy family. It's not like we ate out all the time. So growing up in India, all the food that I ate outside of the house, which I enjoyed a lot, was street food in my neighborhood. And so they're not really well-known restaurants or anything like that. But to me, that was great at the time. As a teenager, that was the best food I could imagine. But in retrospect now, since I've left the country and gone back many times now, A, I can afford to eat in real restaurants when I go back. B, I'm sort of in the business now, so I kind of take the time to learn about the up and coming restaurants, get some recommendations from my relatives who live in India as to where they might eat. So I there's some great places. I mean, there's a wonderful restaurant called Yaucha, and it's in an economic area called the Bandra Kurla complex, about maybe 20 minutes from where my family lives. And it's basically a Pan-Asian restaurant, and it serves delicious, some people hate this word, and you can ask me what I think about it if you want to, but it's a fusion restaurant that fuses the food, combines the food in creative ways of India and China. So it's Pan-Asian, for lack of a better descriptor, but they make things because they understand that Indians like big and bold flavors. So here's the first thing you should know about Indians, right? We love big, bold flavors. So frankly, sometimes even what others might think as being big flavor, I find a little bit bland. Now, I wouldn't say bland, but I need more. And so, right. So Yaucha understands that. And so they give the locals, interpretations of, say, Chinese food or Singaporean food or Malaysian food or, Thai food, but with an Indian in-your-face kind of spice level. And by spice, I don't mean like chili spice.
Right,
but
not heat.
As in exactly depth of flavor. So Yaucha is a good one. And growing up, I went to St. Xavier's College in Mumbai, which is where I got my bachelor's degrees, all the way in South Mumbai, the old part of the city. And outside of the most magnificent train station you'll ever see in your life, the Victoria Terminus train station that the British built back in the day, is this little stall called Cannon, like the military cannon. And at Cannon, you could eat pav bhaji. Pav bhaji is an Indian, like a Mumbai creation. Pav refers to the bread, the yeasty Portuguese-style bread that's often lathered in butter and put on a grill. And the bhaji is just a generic sort of Hindi word for a vegetable stew. But pav bhaji is this ubiquitous Mumbai street food that it's like, where do you like pizza? It's like you have to have your special. So I would eat pav bhaji at Cannon almost every day while attending St. Xavier's College. And then beyond that, you have restaurants. Like if you wanted a traditional thali, which is a big spread of small pieces of food, you can go to Samrat, which is again South Mumbai relic that goes back probably close to 100 years. So there are a lot of these institutions in Mumbai, not unlike other big cities in the world, that have been around forever. And they've changed hands in so many ways. They've changed generational, sort of ownership and management, but certain things just don't change. So it's quite amazing. First of all, it's impossible. I mean, my mind is spinning just thinking about where would I eat in Mumbai. But all I can say is that next time somebody's interested, they can go along with us and we'll show them.
Well, I'm curious. So you mentioned the one restaurant making the yeasty bread on a grill. One of the things that I have noticed is a lot of Mediterranean restaurants here in the U.S. highlight the grill.
Yes.
But a la plancha. Say that again, I'm sorry.
A la plancha.
A la plancha. Okay.
That's on the flat grill. But
okay. And so you did a whole lot of street food, and then when you describe one of your favorite restaurants, you're talking about the grill as well. Is that just because it is so ubiquitous, or is that just because that's how you started? That's what you favor?
So, it provides a contrast. That griddled bread, it's frankly more of a flat top. So I probably misspoke a little bit. It's not a
Oh,
true
okay.
Western style. It's a more of a la plancha, which is a Spanish phrase for a flat top. Asador would be a grill, but a plancha would be just flat top, buttered like crazy, just lathered in butter. I mean, at the time, it was like the most delicious thing I could eat. But just to kind of piggyback off of your question, I'm a big fan of grilling when I have the things in front of me. And at home, Jennifer tries to get me to the grill, which is outside. I'm usually resisting because I'm not always set up for it. But when at the restaurant, when the grill is right next to the saute station, I use the grill more than people realize. So I do grill the bread when I was, when I was in the kitchen every day. We would grill the naan on the grill, grill a variety of things on the grill. Of course, the steaks and things like that. But I'm a big fan of a properly seasoned grill that imparts this depth of flavor and a flash as a contrast to low and slow cooking that's long stews, So grill against the long, low braise, I think makes for a great combination of flavors and textures.
Definitely. So I just have to mention that Jennifer is doing an amazing job of supporting you.
She's on it, yes.
She's commenting like crazy, and we really appreciate it. Because she's giving us some added value. She's talking about the wine and helping us out quite a bit. So we appreciate her. But so outside of Mumbai, what is your let's start here. What's your first memory of U.S. food?
Oh boy. So my first memory of U.S. First of all, I arrived in this country as a vegetarian. So I'd never eaten. My family doesn't eat meat at home. Some of my brothers eat meat outside the home, but we grew up vegetarian for cultural reasons. So, and I came to this country. I was completely a vegetarian. The first food I remember was this massive buffet in Radford, Virginia. You know Radford, Virginia, just outside of Blacksburg. It's a little college town, and the gentleman who was hosting me at Virginia Tech, took me to this buffet in Radford, Virginia. I'd never been to a buffet in my life. And I tell the story in my book as well, that I put every imaginable thing on one plate and tried to eat it. And of course, it was a mess. It was a hot mess and a cold mess at the same time. I had no idea what I was doing. So my first meal in this country was curated by me in the most inappropriate way possible.
Gluttony.
Gluttony. I mean, I was told actually, frankly, I was told by my host, hey, you don't have to put everything in one plate on one sitting. And actually, this has a different connotation now as I think about it. At the time, I didn't think much about it, but the gentleman said to me, in this country, you can go back for seconds. That kind of registered to me as wow. So it's the land of the plenty. You can go back for seconds. It's not like that's your only portion for the day.
It's interesting you say that, because for me, as someone who was in the Navy for 11 years and traveled overseas quite a bit, one of the things that I noticed is whenever we were invited to someone's home, whether it be somebody from the Philippines or any other nationality, the very first thing they would do is cook for us. And very often it was, if we're drinking, we're eating, and they would just continuously cook. So it's interesting to hear that your thought process is America is all about getting seconds, because my experience from traveling overseas is that everyone outside of the U.S. is so generous when it comes to food, because that is almost a love language.
Yeah, food is love. I mean, I was just trying to sneak that in. Food is love, and a lot of people around the world, and even in this country, express their love through food. And frankly, as a chef, I've always tried to do that. Everything I've ever put on a plate was with a sense of love to what I was doing. And so, no, I mean, there's no question about that. It's just a matter of the abundance that this country offers. And sometimes I think folks from here take it for granted perhaps a little bit. And when there's a scarcity, which really isn't a scarcity by world standards, but when there's a perceived scarcity, people freak out a little bit.
Right.
They start hoarding cans of food.
Yes. We've experienced that recently, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
So I'm really curious. I don't get to ask this question very often, but with your background, I'm curious where you started. Like, when it comes to being in the kitchen, what was your first memory of experimenting in the kitchen? What did you learn? Was it as a child? Was it later in life? And what exactly was that dish that you remember as being, aha, I need to be in this industry?
Right. So I'll give you the earliest food memory I have. The earliest food kitchen memory I have is that of helping my mom in the kitchen in Mumbai. And I've talked about this before, is I would want to go out and play with my friends, of course, who doesn't as a child. And I wanted to go play cricket and soccer and field hockey on the streets with my friends, I should say. But then I would see my mom, after having taught all day, being in the kitchen, rolling out chapatis and rolling out rotis in the kitchen and making dinner for everyone that night. My father would sometimes take turns as well. So I often felt guilty going out and playing when I would see my mother, who really had already worked for the day. So anyway, my earliest food memory in the kitchen is helping my mom roll out flatbreads or chapatis or rotis in the kitchen. I didn't particularly like it, obviously. I wanted to go out and play, but I felt it was my obligation to help her. In terms of actually cooking my own food, my first cooking memory, if you will, would be obviously in this country when I was by myself for the first time as a graduate student. And in fact, just today I wrote the introduction to one of the recipes in my book, which is on rajma. Rajma is a North Indian, basically red kidney bean dish. And rajma is a very simple one-pot dish of red beans, essentially. The red beans and rice is a famous, obviously, Cajun Creole preparation. But I write today that, the rajma that I make, in fact, tonight, believe it or not, in the kitchen, we have a version of rajma, which I will eat after we get off air here, is a simple one-pot dish. It's red beans served with white rice on the side. And that's probably is my first memory of cooking food for myself. And that happened in this country, in Blacksburg, Virginia. And I was making pulao, which is a steamed vegetable rice, and then red beans, which rajma, for my roommates and for myself. So that's really my first real memory of cooking in the kitchen. As far as what turned me on to professional cooking, that really wasn't a dish at all. It was literally a professional midlife crisis that I had in 2004. I had already received tenure at the university, and I was like, at the age of 38, I'm like, what else do I do in life? I can keep teaching for the rest of my life, or I can pursue and train myself in something else that's totally different from what I'd already done. And so anyway, mid-afternoon infomercial caught my attention. I enrolled in culinary school, and then I joined up Le Cordon Bleu in Orlando and spent a year and a half doing that. Finished that degree, became a guest chef in DeLand, opened a restaurant. So it was not like one dish got me into professional cooking. It was a different state of professional mind that got me there. But the earliest cooking memory that I have is helping my mom making chapatis at home in Mumbai. And the first memory that I have of making food for myself is making rajma in Blacksburg, Virginia for myself and for my roommates. And the recipe for rajma is in the upcoming book.
And we are eternally grateful that you went down that path and that you had that midlife crisis.
Okay, so I have to pop in here. You mentioned red beans and rice. We had red beans and rice for dinner.
Awesome.
It was nowhere near what you had. I guarantee.
I opened a package and put in some water. I could make it from scratch, but I'm busy.
We don't know.
You look like you're busy. It's a sunny, balmy day where you are, looks like. It looks like you're very busy.
Well, it's funny. On Travel Tuesdays, we really don't do a good job of cooking at all.
I understand. You got a full plate, ironically, but not enough time to cook.
I see what you did there.
You heard me.
So let me ask you this. So with all of your experience, and we'll talk about some of your destinations and things like that later, but is there an area of cooking or even just a culture, a foodie culture that interests you that you've not had a chance to experience yet?
So, I had a fast forwarded kind of life as a chef, I'd like to think. Even though I've been in little old DeLand, Florida all this time, I've had the opportunity to really be in all kinds of settings, I would say, as a chef. Whether it be on the farm, doing our own farm dinners, whether it's, doing food truck food for a fundraiser, whether it's doing obviously fine dining, it's doing big events for fundraisers, cooking for people on the street, or for an event that we put together, hundreds of people on the street, et cetera, and then cooking demos all day long. So I've had the good fortune of being able to cook food in a variety of settings. But in terms of something that perhaps I would like to do moving forward, in some sense, obviously the great unknown that lies ahead of us, right? We don't know where we're going. I mean, the pandemic, the nature of the business, restaurants struggling to stay open, all of that. I think I'd like to find ways of being able to communicate that love for food as tangibly as is possible through this new media, which is the virtual environment. I'm not sure how well it really translates. I mean, I can do cooking demos like anybody else, and I've done hordes of them. I'm not sure, there was Emeril Lagasse would always joke about, if you could have smell-o-vision, if you could just smell the studio, if we had smell-o-vision. Well, obviously that was a technology that kind of went flat. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not a sci-fi junkie, but I do believe in science, and I do believe that the future is as bright as we want it to be. So perhaps the great unknown is the opportunity. So how can we, I'd like to meld. I can cook food professionally, and I can teach about food because the teaching is what I've done most of my life. But how do I communicate the joy and love of food through teaching about it in a virtual environment? And it's not really a foodie thing, but we're doing this now. But I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't have a sense of how well it really translates.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of where we're headed with this. We want to help people be able to experience these different cultures, these different foodie destinations through our guests like you. And then from there, hopefully, eventually experience it themselves.
Absolutely.
So, that's kind of where we're headed and what we're doing. So I think it kind of blends well with your thought process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great production that happens out there, and I don't have enough time. You talk about not having enough time. I don't have enough time in the day to kind of learn the massive amounts of new technologies and try to do everything. As a chef, I ran the kitchens by myself to the point. I mean, I had to help, obviously, but in terms of it was all in all the time. And so I've not been very good delegating, and my wife will attest to this, in the kitchen, because I'm really pretty much a control freak in the kitchen. And but I've always said this. I think some of that comes from the fact that I've been a teacher long before I've been a chef. So in the classroom, we're control freaks as teachers, because we have to manage the content, we have to deliver the content, we are controlling the group in a way and making sure that we're getting stuff done and students are learning. So teaching, I think, naturally lends itself to being slight control freaks. People don't realize that about teachers. We're control freaks in our classrooms. So when I went from teaching to cooking, I didn't know how to not be a control freak in the kitchen. And of course, the paranoia of making sure the business is going to be successful and all those things. But so now here I am. I'm trying to let go of certain things. I'm writing a book. I spent all summer writing this book all by myself, pretty much. Teaching myself the technologies I need to learn, all those things. But at some point, we have to really amplify the effect, the positive effect of what we're able to do. We all have to let go of lots of things, and that's something I need to learn, is how to let go of a lot of things, and just know that it doesn't do any good to try to do all things all the time, but rather identify what things are best amplified, and then let the ancillary and the supplementary things take care of themselves. And if they don't go the way they need to go, it's okay. it's okay, and you can kind of reboot and try it again. So anyway, it didn't quite answer your question, but that's sort of where I'm thinking in terms of my future in all of this.
You know, I had somebody, my bio on Facebook is that I help travelers find the very best in food and wine by land or by sea anywhere in the world. Because we do own a travel agency, and, you know, outside of this podcast, we do work with travelers, and our focus is foodie travel, although we do everything. But somebody sent me a private message and asked how I achieved that. And it was an interesting question to me because I never really thought about, you know, I've taken steps, but I never thought about it from that context. Okay, well, how do I do that? And a lot of it is exactly what we're doing here. It's finding out how you find the very best in food and wine by land or by sea anywhere in the world. But the challenge with that is that it is so subjective. And I would submit to you, Hari, that one of the reasons why you've been so successful is you've actually stepped away a little bit. I know that based on what you and I have talked about previously. So you've obviously found some people that kind of have your vision and are running with it. But again, it's so subjective that if you have a good basis, a good foundation, then it can be taught and it can be traded and gone on beyond you.
Correct. Absolutely. I'll give you a quote from Chef Rick Bayless, you know, who's one of the chefs who wrote a wonderful review for the book and for what I've written. You know, Chef Rick Bayless from Chicago and Bamba and all of those wonderful restaurants. But he said to me in our email communication about the book and his thoughts about the book, he said to me, you know, he was back in the day very close to everything. So by that he meant everything was very close to him and he had a hard time letting go. And to this day, he has very high standards like a lot of people do. And he doesn't just open up restaurants left, right, and center. It takes a lot of thought for him to let go of things that are so near and dear to him. He has to, as you point out, have the right people in place and have the right logistics in place. And even then, it takes some time before he can truly let go in a way that it needs to let go, because he can't be everywhere all the time. And a lot of chefs can't be there everywhere all the time. So as it relates to the book, he had that advice for me is, you know, moving forward, think about ways of not being so close to everything.
Yes.
And our fear is that we think if we're not close to something, we're not going to see it. And if we're not going to see it, we're not able to trust it. So it's this vicious cycle of we always have to be close to everything. But when you're close to everything, you have to be hands-on because you can't just look away. Because you see something, you want to do something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle.
I mean, I run into the same thing here. You know, we actually have let go of a lot of our social media. We have an amazing young man by the name of Patrick who you've communicated with. He's done great things for us, but it was very challenging to let go, you know, to say, okay, it's all right. I have vetted this person. I know them. I know that they have a good heart, that they care about the vision of the company, and that they're going to do what they can. And it's the same way in food, I'm sure.
It's the same way in anything, I would suspect. I mean, I can't imagine having a teaching assistant teaching my classes, let alone a chef cooking my food, right? So a lot of schools, the professors have teaching assistants who do a lot of the teaching. I was a teaching assistant once, and I'm afraid about what the teaching assistant might be teaching when relative to what they should be teaching.
Of course. Yes.
Right? So it's in every profession, I think. And so, yeah, I agree. But, you know, we're all getting a little bit older, so we all have to let go in a way that makes sense, because nothing is forever. We know that.
I get what you're saying. I like making cheesecakes. I have my base recipe, then I change them up. And we just shared one of my cheesecake recipes on our website. And I'm so nervous because I just want to be like, you know what? I'll just come over. I'll just make it for you. Just tell me you're going to do it wrong. I'll just do it for you. Just, I will get a plate. I'll just do it.
You'll be making it for the rest of your life.
Associate that with me.
I know. So now imagine writing a book with recipes, right?
Yes.
Now imagine writing a book with recipes where you're telling people how to make something.
and you've got, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is your second book, right?
This is my second book. In 2015, I wrote the first book. I'm expecting this to be a series of books in the same genre or vein. Yeah, so the first book was titled Dreaming in Spice, period. That was the full title. And it basically was a story of my life, but also a story of how I got into cooking professionally. And I laid out a whole bunch of popular recipes from the restaurant. A lot of food advocacy things, how to be more sustainable as a business, as a food professional, things like that. So that was the first book. And sort of the timeline ended around late 2014 of when that book the story of that book, if you will. So I thought to myself, that this way around, first of all, my focus is something else. But so this book is also Dreaming in Spice, but with a fully focused plant-based, essentially plant-based or vegetarian, at least, a vegetarian focus. With the same idea. So think about recipes. The first book had 115 recipes. This book's going to have about 250 recipes. So that's 300 plus recipes. We'll have to at least make sure that if it's not perfect just the way I would make it, it's close enough where people are going to enjoy it.
Now tell us about that. That has to be so vulnerable to put yourself out there.
That's a good word. That's a good word. That's actually the right word, because it is that. And you have to have some confidence. You have to have some foolishness. You have to have the ability to accept criticism, all those things. I'm not sure I'm good at any of it. But at the end of the day, I'm a teacher first. So we've established that. And so I'm a teacher first. And so I am not hesitant ever to put in writing what I think, because that's what teachers do. I write on the board. Nowadays, I'm typing on a computer. But we write and we put ourselves out there all day long. And so it is that. But I know that should there be someone who says, I didn't like that, or that was not good, the teacher in me will reply by saying, okay, tell me more. What exactly did you not like? What happened? What was the outcome of what you did? And that's how I could kind of get into that conversation. It would not be a defensive, oh, well, that's just not your thing then, or you messed up, or tough, that's just the way it is. It wouldn't be any of that. The teacher in me always wants to come back with well, I want to learn more. What exactly happened here? If a student goes, I didn't understand that, it's my job to try to ask, okay, how else can I do this differently so I can get you where you need to be?
I love it. Yeah, that's so poignant, because all too often we think we're going to do whatever this recipe is and it's going to be perfect for us. But again, like we talked about earlier, it's subjective in many ways. So for you to be willing to have somebody come back and say, well, I didn't like it, and you saying, okay, tell me more. Why? Where did that come from? You can help them tweak it so that it fits their palate.
Absolutely. And as chefs, as cookbook authors, when I see a recipe that calls for a precise amount of salt, for example, either it's a baking recipe, in which case I understand it, or somebody has standardized that recipe to the point where that's it. That's the amount of salt, and it's a good amount of salt. But I don't cook like that. And so you're always tasting as you go. So that's the message throughout anything that I ever write as terms of recipes is the salt and pepper are adjusted to your liking, because I know what I like, but I don't want to force that on you necessarily. But you do put it in a way that makes sense, culinarily speaking. You season in layers, you taste as you go, all those kinds of things. So there's some good principles there without having to give an exact measurement.
I love that you said that. I went to a restaurant once that now through COVID, you don't have any condiments or salt and pepper on the tables, etc. But right. I went to a restaurant pre-COVID and they had no salt, no pepper on the table. And I mentioned that something was under-seasoned, and I was told that the chef that was their recipe and there was no salt, no pepper available. I was like, wait a minute. I get that you're proud of your recipe. I get that you like what you have done, and that's fantastic. However, every palate is different. There is no possible way that the seasoning can be spot on for every person out there. There are people way more that like things salty way more than I do. And I still thought that it needed some salt. So
I'll piggyback off of that. So at our restaurant, we've never had salt and pepper shakers at the table. Okay. Now, I season the food fairly well, fairly aggressively. Now, we've had many instances where we've had some instances where our guests have said that's a little too salty. And we've had some instances where our guests, like you would have said, can I have some more salt and pepper? And my question always to the server who comes back with that request, at least when I was in the kitchen, which is most of the time, was always, did they taste the food first? Did they taste the food, or did they just instinctively ask for salt and pepper? And if the server told me, no, they haven't tasted it yet, I'll be the first to tell you. In some instances, I might have said, good. I hope they add a bunch of salt to it because they're going to find out it's going to be really salty if they add to it.
I don't disagree with you there at all. As a matter of fact, that's actually, so I have a business background, and one of the studies that I can't remember which company it was. I think it was IBM way back. They would take candidates for a job, they would take them out to dinner. And one of the things they were watching for was whether or not they seasoned their food before they tasted it. Mm-hmm. And if they did, that person was no longer a candidate because you don't have good decision-making skills. You have to taste it and then from there make a decision.
Absolutely. That says something, and I'm glad it was at a level like that because a psychologist helped them through that test, I'm sure.
Absolutely, yes. And
so if a person is like that, they're going to think that what they do is always correct. They're not open to suggestion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be problematic in an organizational structure like an IBM. So I can see why that's an issue, and that's a necessary test for somebody to be considered for a position.
So Hari, I'm curious. If I gave you an extra $1,000 a month in your personal budget, what would you do with it?
Well, you really want to know?
Absolutely. All right, foodie fans, thanks for tuning in. Check us out next Tuesday for part 2 of this fantastic Foodies interview.
Bryce, you jerk. We want to know the answer.
Well, great. Hit subscribe.
Fine, but you're sleeping on the couch.